I still remember the way his laughter echoed through the garage that day, sharp, cold, slicing right through my pride. But that was years ago. Now, the only sound in my office is the soft hum of the espresso machine and the low purr of a V12 engine being tested 2 floors below. The scent of coffee blends with a faint metallic tang of oil, a smell I never really left behind, no matter how high I climbed. The nameplate on my desk reads, Haley Brooks, Chief Mechanical Engineer, Ferrari North America. Sometimes, I still catch myself staring at it, wondering how far those greasy, trembling hands really came. My silk blouse sticks slightly against my skin. I'd been working on site all morning, and despite the tailored suit and polished heels, I can still feel the ghost of motor grease under my nails. My phone buzzes. Unknown number. I swipe to answer, and the voice on the other end makes my heart jolt. Miss Brooks? This is Silverstone Motors. We're in a bit of trouble. Our boss asked if you could visit. Silverstone Motors. My old workshop. For a second, I just stare out my window, down at the Ferrari logo glinting in the courtyard sunlight. And I smile. Sure. I whisper. Tell your boss his filthy mechanic will be right there. It was 5 years ago, same garage, different world. Back then, Silverstone Motors smelled like gasoline, sweat, and the faint sweetness of old rubber. I was 23, the only woman in a crew of 8 men, all twice my size and half as patient. My hands were always stained with grease, my hair tied up in a messy knot, and my overalls hung loose around my shoulders. I worked hard. Too hard, maybe. But no matter what I did, I was always the girl mechanic. Haley, sweetheart, my boss, Mr. Turner, would say, his voice dripping with fake charm. You missed a spot. Maybe go back to changing tires. Leave the engines to the men, huh? Every word landed like a punch I couldn't dodge. I'd force a smile, swallow the ache, and keep tightening bolts that squealed like they shared my frustration. The day everything broke, the shop was crowded, clients, crew, noise everywhere. A red Maserati had come in, the kind that made every man in the room turn their head. The engine problem? Minor. The fix? Simple. But when I volunteered, Turner laughed loud enough for the whole garage to hear. You, he smirked, wiping his hands on a rag. You're just a filthy mechanic. Don't touch that car. People laughed. I felt the blood rush to my face, my throat tightening until I could barely breathe. My hands trembled so hard I nearly dropped my wrench. My father's wrench, the one with his initials carved near the handle. JB. Dad used to say, engines don't care if you're a man or a woman. They only care if you listen. That voice echoed in my head now, louder than the laughter, stronger than the sting. So I placed the wrench down, slowly, deliberately. My eyes met Turner's. You're right, I said softly. I am a mechanic, just not yours anymore. I untied my apron, left the rag on the counter, and walked out, grease stains, tears, and all. Outside, the evening air hit cold against my skin. I didn't have a plan. No money, no backup. Just my father's wrench in my hand and a burning promise in my chest. One day, they'll regret ever laughing. The first few months after leaving Silverstone were the hardest of my life. I rented a small room behind a diner on the edge of town. The ceiling leaked, the walls smelled of fried onions, and the rent was due every week. But it was mine. During the day, I worked on old motorcycles for local delivery guys. At night, I studied online engineering courses, business classes, even basic accounting tutorials on YouTube. Sometimes, I'd fall asleep at my desk, my fingers still black with oil, a wrench tucked beside my laptop like a promise I refused to break. There were nights I wanted to quit. Nights I stared at my hands, blistered, raw, and wondered if Turner had been right. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that red Maserati and a smirk, and it lit a fire so bright it burned the doubt right out of me. My first big break came from a woman named Dr. Evelyn Reyes, a former race car engineer turned consultant. She stopped by my shop one afternoon after her vintage Aston Martin stalled on the highway. I fixed it in under an hour. She looked at me differently, not like a girl out of place, but like someone who belonged. "You have good instincts," she said, watching me work. "Ever thought about specializing in performance builds?" That moment changed everything. Evelyn became my mentor. She introduced me to the precision world of performance mechanics, where every detail mattered and every error cost thousands. I soaked up every lesson she gave me: how to tune an engine like a symphony, how to negotiate contracts, how to make your name mean something more than the grease under your nails. Within 2 years, I had my own small but loyal clientele: racers, collectors, even a few Hollywood types who wanted custom rebuilds. I kept a low profile, though. No social media bragging, no flashy ads. Just quiet success. The first time a luxury brand approached me, Ferrari of all names, I thought it was a prank. But when I flew out to California for a consulting test, the lead engineer watched me recalibrate an F8 Tributo engine and said, simply, "You belong here." And I did. They hired me 6 months later as a senior mechanical specialist. 3 years after that, I became chief mechanical engineer for Ferrari North America. But despite the title, the office, the glossy red cars that bore my designs, I never forgot the smell of that old garage or the sound of Turner's laughter echoing off concrete walls. So when my assistant walked in this morning, holding out the call sheet that said Silverstone Motors, my past came roaring back like an engine ready to redline. And this time, I was the one holding the keys. Silverstone Motors looked smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was always this small. It just took success to see it clearly. The same cracked signs still hung over the entrance. The same oil stains still marked the floor where I used to stand for hours. Only now, I walked in wearing a tailored black suit, heels clicking on the concrete like punctuation marks to every insult I'd ever swallowed. Turner was at the front desk, arguing with someone on the phone. His once dark hair had turned mostly gray, his stomach pressed against his work shirt, and the arrogance that once filled every corner of the shop had thinned into exhaustion. He looked up when he heard my voice. "Mr. Turner," I said, calm even. He froze. "Haley?" For a split second, I saw the confusion cross his face, then the recognition, then disbelief. I smiled, tilting my head slightly. "You called Ferrari, remember? I'm here on behalf of the chief mechanical engineer." He blinked. "You work for Ferrari?" I let the silence hang before answering. "No, Mr. Turner. I am Ferrari." The air between us thickened. Even the hum of the garage seemed to pause. He laughed, that same shallow, disbelieving sound I'd once feared. "Come on, don't joke around. You were just a filthy mechanic?" I finished for him, voice steady. "Yeah, I remember." He opened his mouth, closed it again, looking at the floor as if the tiles could explain the years that had passed. "I came because you asked for help," I said, walking closer, my heels echoing softly. "Ferrari's partnership program received a request from Silverstone Motors." I read the file myself. He swallowed. "We were struggling. The market's changed. Clients moved on. We just need respect." I interrupted, arching a brow. "Support? A second chance." He nodded faintly, shame flickering in his eyes. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I looked around, the dusty tools, the flickering lights, the younger mechanics glancing curiously from the back. I saw myself in them, the girl who once stood there, too afraid to speak. I turned back to him. "Do you know what engines taught me, Mr. Turner? They only run right when every part is treated with respect. You can't force performance out of something you've neglected." He said nothing. "Ferrari is willing to consider a collaboration," I continued, "but under one condition." His head lifted. "Anything." "You'll rebuild your workforce, train young mechanics, women included. Equal pay, fair shifts, no jokes about who belongs. You'll create an environment that builds people up, not tears them down." He hesitated, the pride still twitching behind his eyes. "That's a lot of change." "So was believing in myself after you laughed in my face," I said quietly. The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. The crew at the back pretended not to listen, but their eyes told another story, one of awe, disbelief, and hope. Finally, Turner nodded, voice small. If that's what it takes, I'll do it. I gave him a soft, measured smile. Not vindictive, just final. Good. Then maybe Silverstone has a chance after all. I turned to leave, but his voice stopped me. Haley? I glanced back. He looked older now, deflated. I was wrong about you. I held his gaze. No, you weren't, I said. You were wrong about women like me. And with that, I walked out, sunlight spilling through the open door, warming my face like the world finally catching up to what I always knew I could be. The drive back to Los Angeles felt lighter somehow, like I'd finally exhaled after holding my breath for 5 years. But something in me wasn't finished yet. See, it's one thing to prove them wrong. It's another to make sure no one else ever has to fight the same battle. The following week, I called a meeting with Ferrari's North American board. The glass conference room overlooked a skyline that shimmered under morning sunlight. All steel, ambition, and second chances. I want to launch a mentorship initiative, I told them, sliding a folder across the table. Hands-on training for young women in automotive engineering. Full sponsorship, full pay. The executives glanced at each other, skeptical at first. Then one of them, Matteo, my mentor from Italy, smiled. I think it's time, he said. And just like that, Project Ignite was born. Within 3 months, we had our first class of 10 women, some fresh out of school, some single mothers, some mechanics who'd been told the same thing I once heard. You don't belong here. I trained with them myself, every weekend. We laughed, got our hands dirty, and shared stories that sounded too familiar to ignore. One of them, a shy girl named Renee, reminded me of my younger self, nervous, eager, apologizing for taking up space. When she struggled to remove a rusted bolt, I placed my hand over hers and said, "Engines don't care who you are, Renee. Only if you know what you're doing." Her eyes lit up, the same way mine once did when my father said those words. Meanwhile, Silverstone Motors began its slow rebuild. Turner kept his promise. He hired new staff, created safer conditions, and for the first time, added a women's training program under Ferrari mentorship supervision. Every month, he sent progress reports. And every month, I'd read them quietly, proud, but grounded. Then one afternoon, an envelope arrived. Inside was a photo, Turner standing with 3 new female mechanics in clean red uniforms, smiling beside a refurbished Maserati. On the back, in shaky handwriting, it read, "Thank you for giving me a second chance to do it right." I stared at it for a long time. Then I pinned it to the board above my desk, right beside my father's wrench, now framed behind glass. People often ask me what success feels like. They expect me to say it's money, power, or the thrill of recognition. But the truth? It feels like peace. Like the quiet satisfaction of knowing that the little girl who once stood in a greasy garage, trembling under someone else's laughter, finally turned that echo into something good. And maybe that's what real power looks like. Not revenge, but rewriting the story so no one else has to bleed through the same pages. A year later, I found myself standing on a stage in Maranello, Italy, the global Ferrari conference. The auditorium buzzed with reporters, engineers, and executives, all waiting for the presentation of our newest innovation, the world's first hybrid supercar entirely designed and tested by a female-led engineering team. When the applause finally quieted, I took a breath and looked out across the crowd. Hundreds of faces, flashes of cameras, but in my mind, I saw only one, my father's. He'd been gone for years, but I could almost hear him in the back of my head, that familiar gravelly chuckle. "You listened, didn't you, Hales?" After the ceremony, I slipped away from the lights and noise, out onto the test track. The evening sky stretched wide and crimson, the same shade as the cars I used to dream about fixing. I pulled the small framed wrench from my bag. It still bore his initials, JB, scratched and faded from years of use. I held it tight, the cool metal pressing into my palm, grounding me. That wrench had once been a symbol of struggle, a reminder of every time I had to prove myself. Now it was something else. A keepsake of endurance, of quiet rebellion, of faith that never broke even when everything else did. My phone buzzed again. It was Renee, sending a photo. The Ignite girls standing in their new workshop, laughing, covered in oil stains and pride. I smiled, wide, unguarded, free. Maybe this was always the point. Not just to fix engines, but to fix the system that kept women from touching them in the first place. As I slid the wrench back into my bag, a gentle wind swept across the track, lifting my hair. The engines hummed in the distance, steady, alive, loyal. I whispered softly, more to myself than anyone else. Turns out, the dirt under my nails was just gold waiting to shine. Then I smiled, turned toward the horizon, and walked forward, heels clicking against the concrete, each step a quiet celebration of every mile I'd fought to get here. Because I wasn't just a mechanic anymore. I was proof.